Okay, so to start off with, hi everyone. I'm going to leave my camera on to begin with, just so that for those of you who haven't worked with me before, this is me, I'm Yvonne, and we'll be looking at depreciation today. I'm going to cover it in terms of exam questions, right? So I'm going to go straight to an exam level question for one of the first year subjects, and I'm going to talk us through depreciation from an exam technique perspective, so that whatever you're doing it in terms of marks, you're doing it in terms of gathering marks. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to talk about in terms of consistency, your approach, your exam technique, and we're going to kind of bundle this all together instead of looking at depreciation as though it's a purely theoretical thing. And then obviously, you get to questions and the case studies, in your questions look nothing like the way that you've learned the stuff. So, that generally is a little bit of a problem. I would prefer that you kind of focus on the stuff that I'm saying as opposed to trying to make loads and loads and loads of notes. I will create a PDF of the stuff that I'm scribbling. That's going to be pretty untidy. I'm going to create a PDF of the stuff that I scribble so that I can send it to you after the session, and we will be recording the session so you can pick it up from there. But I want you to pay attention to the stuff that I'm saying, because otherwise, you're busy scribbling and I'm busy carrying on talking and you miss the next 5 sentences. So if I can have your attention, your focus, let's focus on the stuff now, and then we can pick up the detail, and you can get the PDFs and stuff after that. So we've got about half an hour. I probably will go over time a little bit because I always do. Apologize for that. Again, we'll sort this out in the recording. So I'm going to switch my webcam off also because it doesn't help, internet. Everybody's internet is like semi falling over all the time anyway. So let's switch that off, and then we have our little screen in front of us. Okay, so this particular question that I'm looking at that we're going to use is actually from first year FINAC paper from May, June 2019. So nice and recent. Whether you're studying, FAC 1501, 1502, 1601, 1602, the same concepts are relevant. So this is important for you. So the fact that this is a FAC 1601 paper is irrelevant. The same depreciation issues apply. So this is why I'm using this as an example. It's a really good example of the type of thing that you may find in an exam. And obviously the issue is, what on earth do I do with it? So here's a few things, I'm going to jot down a few things that we want to be careful about in terms of passing depreciation questions, right? So, it's all well and good to say, I want to know depreciation and I want to understand depreciation or all that, and I want you to as well. But let's also understand that the intention here is to pass questions and to pass stuff, and part of our discussion around depreciation is how to do that in exams. Some of the challenges that you're going to have, one of them is a massive time limitation. So you're going to have to make sure that when you get into the exam, you're able to deal with this in a limited amount of time, which means that your process has to be really good. You can't get into the exam okay, what do I do? What do I do with depreciation? How am I going to do this? You need to make sure that you're comfortable with the stuff. Okay, so we also have a lot of info in the case study. So this is something that gets in the way, and I'm not going to talk about how to plan case study information in this particular lecture. Obviously, in the full lecture in our classes, I go through the full case study planning and how to deal with the information consistently, etc. But obviously, I'm not going to cover that here. But be aware of the fact that a lot of your problem and a lot of your time issues comes from how on earth do we deal with all the information? How do we keep it together? How do we know what we're doing? What are we looking for? What's the issues, etc., etc. Consistency is an issue when it comes to depreciation, because there are very many different ways of asking the same type of thing, and that creates an issue for us where we say, okay, well, I did the question, and I've done this and I've done this, but now I get another question looks totally different. What do I do? How do I deal with this? So we've got to be very careful about that. So one of the things I want to focus on is that there are 3 types of or 3 different depreciation calculations that we need to do, or 3 different things that we need to be aware of. And I kind of call them the old, the sold, and the new. And I think, you know, if you've actually looked at any questions, these are issues for us. Like, how do you deal with the fact that, you know, assets are sold during the year, you buy new assets during the year, and then, you know, you have the remaining assets on hand. How do you structure those calculations? So that's some of the stuff that I want to look at, today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is when you do your calculations, when you do your workings, it's absolutely crucial, especially for depreciation questions, but for all of your questions, always get into a habit, like, you know, absolute habit, always draw yourself a timeline when you start a question, so that as you're reading and working through information, you can plot where the stuff is happening on a timeline, so that you can visualize how many months before the end of the year, how many months after, is this before the end of the year, is this after the year, before the year, whatever. So always draw a timeline. I never use a ruler because, you know, we don't have that kind of time to waste. And you plot down the beginning of year, which BOY, and then your year end, right? So we always plot the dates for the beginning and the end of the year so that we can visualize what it is we're doing. And then obviously, you know, if something was bought there and sold there and changed here, and you can plot it and go, okay, now I understand it, I can visualize what I'm doing. And that applies to all of your information, but obviously in this question, I'm going to focus only on the PPE and the depreciation stuff. So fine, so we've got our timeline, we draw our timeline. For our workings, whenever you do your calculations, one of the things that, you know, we need to make absolutely sure of is that you reference your calculations. I always use the little W's, working 1, working 2, and label your workings, right? I know that you're in a rush to do the stuff, but way too many students lose marks because you know, you're so desperate to quickly get the calculation done and get the answer down that you don't spend time letting the examiner know how you got there and what it was that you did, and he or she can't make sense of your calculation. Like, I don't know where you calculated the depreciation, I don't know what you did, I can't follow your calculations, and therefore you get 0. So it's absolutely crucial that you get into a habit of saying, you know, in working 1, I'm going to calculate, you know, I'm going to calculate depreciation for equipment, I'm going to calculate the loan interest, I'm going to calculate this. Always give a label so that I can see, the examiner can see, this is what I'm busy calculating. There's a lot of marks that students lose because, you know, they'll put like one answer down instead of taking, you know, taking the person or taking the marker through step by step. So these are crucial mark issues that students lose marks when they go, but Yvonne, I don't understand why I failed the exam. I kind of know my stuff. Well, yeah, but if you're not labeling your stuff, if the examiner can't find your calculations, then you're going to be in trouble. Okay, so let's take a look at the information. When it comes to the information, it's kind of all over the show. And again, I'm not going to focus on I'm not going to focus on all of our stuff. I'm going to focus on our depreciable assets at the moment. And what I do with my case studies, with everything on there, I always indicate whether or not this is something that belongs on the statement of financial position or the statement of profit or loss, because questions will, often ask, create or give us the statement of profit or loss, or give us a statement of financial position, and then this allows me to split it. So when it comes to that, I always indicate whether it's an asset or a liability or whatever. So in this case, this belongs on the statement of financial position, it's PPE, statement of financial position, PPE, equipment set cost is my SFP, this is also PPE. So this is my planning when I'm reading the case study, my accumulated depreciation, SFP, PPE, okay? So I know in this case that I'm dealing with these 4 numbers over here, these 4 issues over here. The first thing that I want to talk about is to be very aware of the dates. Most times they'll give you certain dates, and in this case you'll see that they're saying the accumulated depreciation they're giving you is as at the 1st of September. And this is why it's really important to draw a timeline, because when is that depreciation relevant for? So our year end is the 31st of August. So let's plot 31st of August 18 on our timeline, which makes the beginning of year the 1st of September 17. Okay, so now I know that's the beginning of the year and the end of the year. What the exams do is they will either give you the accumulated depreciation at the beginning of the year, or they'll give you the accumulated depreciation at the end of the year. The difference between that is that for one of them, if they give it to you here, you still have to calculate depreciation for the year. Whereas if they give it to you there, it means that depreciation has already been calculated. So this is the first thing that you can kind of look and go, okay, the information on the case study, in this case, they gave you the 1st of September, which means that you still have to calculate depreciation for this particular question. Okay, so that's our first indication of like, this is part of what you're going to have to do, right? So they've given you information from here, your accumulated depreciation from the beginning of the year. Great. Now, the information relating to your assets and your depreciation in this particular question is sitting in 2.2 and 2.3. I'm not going to go through the rest of them. So let's use these as an example of, you know, for me to talk you through depreciation. In this case, there was an asset that was sold and an asset that was bought here, and then this is your depreciation rate. So these, you know, this is the information that we need. So I'm going to deal with the stuff that's sold first, then I'll deal with the stuff that's bought, and then I'll deal with the remaining. So let's take a look at stuff that was sold. When we sell stuff, we got to be aware that there's two things that we have to do. We need to make sure, obviously, that we calculate the depreciation for the year, and then we need to calculate the disposal. We actually need to do the disposal, and that's either going to create a profit or a loss. Now, I'm not covering the disposal calculation in this particular area or in this particular lecture. I'm focusing on the depreciation stuff itself. But I want you to know part of this process and part of your methodology needs to be taking this one step at a time and separating this. Do the one, then do the next. Make sure that you calculate the depreciation first, because you've got to have the carrying value when you sell the asset. So let's take a look at this. The only transaction involving equipment occurred on the 28th of February 2018, when equipment with a cost price of $15,000 and an accumulated depreciation of $14,000 on 1st of September 2017, so you can see again they're giving you those dates or those amounts at the beginning of the year, was traded in for a new one. Its depreciation had been correctly calculated at 75 Rand as at 28 February 2018. So what they've done here is they've said to you, on the 28th of Feb, and as I say, like always plot this out, on the 28th of Feb 18, they sold an asset. Okay, so I can visualize, I understand that, and they've given you the accumulated depreciation here, right? So in terms of my calculation here, and this is now part of my template that I always do for my equipment calculations or my depreciation calculations. I always start off by identifying my cost, my accumulated depreciation, which gives me my carrying value at the beginning of year, right? So for my calculation purposes, it's always a good idea to make sure that I know and I consistently deal with this stuff, right? So in terms of this, I'm now calculating and dealing with the equipment that was sold. Okay, so working one, I'm only dealing with, and you can see my label's nice. So the equipment that I've sold. The cost price of the equipment that was sold on the 28th of February was 15,000 Rand, and the accumulated depreciation was 14,000 Rand. So my cost price, 15,000, accumulated depreciation, 14,000, which leaves me with a carrying value at the beginning of the year of 1,000 Rand. My depreciation for the year, in this case they gave to me, which was very nice of them, very, very sweet, that was 75 Rand. So I don't actually have to calculate depreciation there. That's fine. That means that my new carrying value here is 925 Rand. So my carrying value at sale is 925 Rand. Now, I'm not going to calculate the disposal and the profit and loss on disposal for this, but this is the amount that you'd use when you calculate your profit and loss, okay? So that is the equipment that was sold. The second thing I'm going to do is deal with equipment that I've bought. So you'll see what I'm going to have is 3 different calculations. And this is where students start struggling because they say, okay, Yvonne, I kind of know how to do it. But when you've got so many changes during the year, how do you calculate depreciation? And the answer there is split them between the stuff that you've sold so that you can calculate everything nice and together and keep it all nice and clean and together. Then calculate the stuff that you've bought so you can keep that nice and together and clean, and then calculate the rest of the stuff. So I'm going to do the same thing. Here's my cost, my accumulated depreciation, my carrying value, okay? And obviously this stuff, there isn't any, okay? Sorry, because I bought this during the year. But for me, I always use the same formula because I want to make sure that I get used to using the same methodology. So I've bought it during the year. The new machine was purchased at a cost of 25,000 Rand on the same day. And I'm not going to talk about the trade-in value because that's about the disposal. So we also bought an asset over here on the 28th of February. Okay. Sorry, my little screen's going back and forth a little badly. Okay, so we bought an asset for 25,000 Rand. Now let's get to the actual depreciation calculation. I've been talking about exam technique and the structure, and let's actually talk about my depreciation, okay? The first thing we need to know is what your depreciation rate is, and that's always given to you in the case study. So we'll go and look for that. My vehicles are at 20% per annum according to the Straightline method. And my equipment is 15% per annum according to the diminishing balance method. So I'm dealing with equipment, so I'm doing 15% diminishing balance method. Okay, so they generally like to give you one of each so that they can examine whether or not you know what you're doing. So 15% diminishing balance. I always write that on my question or on my workings because I also want to make sure that I keep track of that. Okay, so the idea behind diminishing balance, put this on a new page because I want to explain. The idea or the difference between your straight line and your diminishing balance, and straight line is always, is always the easiest because it's nice and simple. The difference between this is basically very, very simply how you use the value of the asset, if you want to put it that way. So the concept of depreciation is that you've raised an asset as an indication of the value that that asset is going to bring you in the future. So for example, if you raise an asset of 10,000 Rand, the idea of saying it's worth 10,000 Rand or you pay 10,000 Rand or whatever for it, the fact that you've got it in as an asset is an indication that you believe that that asset is going to bring you in some way a value of 10,000 Rand in the future, right? If the money was given to you straight away, or if it was worth this to you right now, or you had it, then it would be a sale. It's not the same as saying, well, I've made a 1,000 Rand sale, and so this is money. We raise an asset when we realize that somehow or the other, it's going to bring us value. If we have a machine, we believe it's going to bring us value in the form of making products for us to sell. So if I have a 10,000 Rand machine, it means that I believe, it's going to bring me that kind of money in the future, if you will. Really, really, really oversimplified. But every year that you use it, right, if you raise it in year 1 at 10,000 Rand, every year that you use it, you are using up the value, right? So at the end of the first year, you kind of say, well, at the beginning of the year, we believed that we were, in the future, this thing is going to bring us 10,000 Rand. But when we look at this now at the beginning of the second year, we have already used up some of that value. We have realized, we call that realizing, right? We've realized some of that value. Now we look to the future and maybe we go, well, from the beginning of year 2, this is now, going to bring us 9,000 in the future and 8, etc., etc. So depreciation, if you will, is kind of an indication of using up the value of the asset. And the difference between these two is how we use that value. Okay, so in terms of Straightline, the idea here is that we would use the same amount of value every single year. It's evenly spread. We believe that, you know, in this really simple calculation, we believe that every year we would use up 1,000 rands worth of value until eventually after 10 years, the machine is not worth anymore. So we believe that the machine is going to carry on working the same way, at the same speed, at the same strength, developing, you know, creating the same amount of items for us every single year until eventually, you know, there's no more value left. So we use it evenly, which is why they call it straight line. Okay. Diminishing balance, however, says that you use the value faster in the beginning. So it's kind of an indication that says, you know, a machine, if you will, is going to be more productive and more efficient in the first couple of years, and it's going to start slowing down. So we need to indicate that, you know, the value of the machine is going to be less and less and less as years go by, because we use a lot of value up front, and then the thing starts slowing down, it doesn't work quite as well, etc., etc., etc. And so this is more like it's an uneven indication of how we use the value of those assets. So when we're calculating depreciation on Straightline, we do this on cost, right? So it will be cost times our depreciation rate, and that is going to give us a value that will be the same every year. And that is obviously, you know, because we're going to be using it evenly, right? Whereas when it comes to diminishing balance method, they say, okay, you need to calculate the value, or you need to calculate depreciation on the carrying value. So for you, your main focus and your main issue here needs to be understanding that Straightline is cost and diminishing balance is on the carrying value. So if we take a look at this particular calculation, for example, if we say, you know, you had an asset for 10,000 Rand and you depreciate it by 10%, your depreciation rate is 10%, that means that every year you're going to be writing off 1,000 Rand. So in year one, your calculation would be 1,000 Rand. In year two, you would still be starting with your cost, 10,000 Rand times 10% equals 1,000 Rand. In year three, you would be starting off again with your cost, 10,000 Rand times 10% equals 1,000 Rand. Okay, so your depreciation, it's even all the time. You use 10% of the value every year, fine. However, your carrying value says, your diminishing balance says you start with your carrying value. So in year one, your carrying value is your cost, right? Because you haven't started depreciation yet. 10% would give you 1,000 Rand. Okay, so you can see in year one, your depreciation would actually be fairly similar. Well, it would be similar, sorry, it would be the same because there's no depreciation. Now in year two, you need to use your carrying value, not your cost. So the first part of your calculation for this particular, for diminishing balance, needs to be identifying what your carrying value is, which means you've got to start off by saying, what's my cost? 10,000 Rand. What's my accumulated depreciation up to this point? 1,000 Rand from last year. Therefore, what's my carrying value? 9,000 Rand. Now I can calculate my depreciation on my carrying value. Still 10%, 900 Rand. So year two, carrying value was my cost less my accumulated depreciation, 9,000 Rand. And now we have a carrying value, oh, sorry, now we have depreciation of 900. In year three, then they say, okay, you have to use your carrying value. So you start again. You go, okay, what's my cost? 10,000 Rand. What's my accumulated depreciation? And this is where we start losing track a little bit, because now with, you know, there's quite a few numbers. Now you need to make sure that you're keeping track of the fact that your accumulated depreciation will be year one's depreciation plus year two's depreciation. So now you need There's year 1 depreciation plus year 2 depreciation. Therefore, my depreciation is 1,000, my accumulated depreciation is 1,900 Rand, which gives me a carrying value of 8,100 Rand. Now my depreciation for the year at 10% is going to be 810. So you can see when we were doing straight line, you can see that every year was the same, nice and evenly. But here you can see with diminishing balance, you can see that your depreciation is reducing every year. Why? Because we believe that in the beginning of the life of an asset, we get, if you will, we get more value out of it. And as time passes, we use or we get less value out of our asset. Okay, so the main issue here for you is keeping track of whether or not you're dealing with straight line or diminishing balance. And you can see here, part of the challenge is continually keeping track of your carrying value, your carrying value, your carrying value, as opposed to the nice and simple thing of like, as long as you know what your cost is, you're fine. Okay, so for our equipment that's new, we've bought it during the current year, right? Which means that there is no accumulated depreciation. So that's nice and simple, which means that there isn't actually a difference between our straight line and our diminishing balance at this point in time. Our cost is our carrying value. So our depreciation would be 3,750, right? I've bought the asset for 25,000. My depreciation at 15%, diminishing balance is 3,750, right? So that's my next step. But, this is where new equipment gets tricky. The next thing we need to calculate is how many months did you have it for? If we bought this during the year, which we did, okay, and this again is why, for me, timelines are so important. It means that you did not have this asset on hand the entire year, which means that you don't depreciate the asset for the whole year if you didn't have it for the whole year. This is what we call prorating depreciation. So what we have to do now is go, how many months of the year did you have that asset? We will only be depreciating it for those months. From the end of February to the end of August is 6 months. Okay, so this is the next step in the calculation that we need to do. So we say, how many months? Now, in my workings, I always trigger this by actually writing down, and this is what I want you to get used to as a format, months, and then write. It's from March to August, right? Because it will be the 1st of August, because we bought on the 28th of Feb. Write the date down. Therefore, we're dealing with 6 months. That means that we will be dividing our depreciation by 12 to identify, you know, for every month that we have that asset, what is our depreciation? So we divide it by 12 and say, okay, every month I have X amount of depreciation and I had it for 6 months. So 3,750 divided by 12 times 6 means that my depreciation for the new asset was 1875. Okay, I separate the new assets out of the sold assets and out of the old assets because of this particular issue, right? Because when we buy assets during the year, we have to prorate it. When we've had assets on hand for the whole year, we don't need to prorate it, so we're not going to. Okay, then I do my old equipment. And as I say, I name this old, and you can do this on your working papers. You know, you can do this in your answers, and you see I'm going to use exactly the same format that I did here, which is cost, accumulated depreciation, and my carrying value at the beginning of year, so that I know what I'm dealing with. Now, my old equipment is the stuff that was on hand at the beginning of year, which is 130,000 and 24,000. Which is going to give me the carrying value of the stuff that I had on hand at the beginning of the year. Okay, so that was my carrying value. But now we have to remove the stuff that we sold, because you can see, sorry, back and forth here can get a little bit seasick. This is what we're looking at the moment, but I'm trying to calculate the depreciation for the year, but we sold something during the year. So we've got to take that out the equation. We've dealt with it completely already. So all I want to do is remove anything to do with that sold asset from this calculation. So we remove the cost and the accumulated depreciation out of there entirely. Okay, so we remove the sold, which means that the cost, we're taking the 130 minus the 15, as well as the accumulated depreciation, which is the 24 minus the 14. And I'm sort of taking this a little bit faster so we can actually get done sometime today. Okay, so we have 115,000 over there, and we've got 10,000 over here, which means that my carrying value of the remaining equipment, the equipment that was on hand for the whole of the year, is 105,000. Now, again, let's take a look at the rest of my template, if you will. Depreciation is at 15% diminishing balance. You'll see I always write that out because it's such an easy mistake to make, right? So 105,000 times 15% is 15,750. So that is my depreciation for the entire year. I'm still going to say months. How many months was this on hand? Because I have to trigger this, otherwise I'm going to forget it. Okay, so the most important thing you can do in exams, to prepare for exams, is be as consistent as possible so that you don't risk losing stuff or forgetting stuff or not dealing with stuff. So months, in this case, I'm dealing with all the equipment that was on hand for the entire year. So from September to August, which is 12 months, which is saying basically 12 over 12. And that is my depreciation. So my total depreciation, if you will, on equipment is going to be the depreciation on my sold, the depreciation on my new, and the depreciation on my old. My depreciation on my sold asset is 75. My depreciation on my new asset was 1875. And my depreciation on my old assets was 15,750. And so we add these up, and this gives us our total depreciation for the year. Now you can see it's tricky, right? And it looks like a lot of work, but by splitting this up, you have a chance of dealing with all of this accurately. What I want to say as we finish up is the way that this stuff is marked means that you're going to get marks as you go, right? The more that you show your calculations, the more likely you are to get partial marks. So if we imagine, for example, your calculation on the old equipment, there's a possibility that there may be 4 marks on offer for this particular balance, for your depreciation calculation here. But if you get 15,750 and that is on the mark plan and markers go, that's great, we'll give you 4 marks for that. That's what you want. But what students struggle with, obviously, is the possibility that you get 15,000. And then the marker goes, okay, no, you don't get it right at all. So this is what you panic about. But here's the way it works. The marker starts by looking at your answer and says, oh, okay, your answer's not the same. So therefore, how did you get to your answer? And they will then go through your calculation and go, what did you get right as the part of the process of your calculation, and what did you get wrong? So they'll start off by going, okay, well, you need to calculate the carrying value. So maybe you forgot to remove the stuff that you sold. Maybe it just, you were panicked and you forgot about it. So they'll say, well, the starting point is you need to know that you have to start with the carrying value. So we're going to give you 1 mark for the carrying value. You need to know that you removed the stuff that you sold, but you forgot to do that, so you're not going to get a mark for that. You need to then calculate depreciation on your carrying value, but you would have used the wrong carrying value, right? How does that work? You get the marks. As long as you calculated the depreciation properly, you will get the marks even if you use the wrong number. So if you use the 106 to calculate your depreciation instead of the 105, you have already lost the mark because you forgot to put that amount in there, but you will get the mark for knowing how to calculate depreciation. Okay, so although you left one or two things out, there's a possibility that they'll say, not the possibility, the way it's done is that they will say, okay, what part of the calculation did you get right? Now you can imagine if all you did was write down a bunch of stuff without actually indicating what you were doing and not labeling it, you're not going to get the mark. So many times I just see students doing this: 130 plus 12 times 12% times 3/12 minus, or minus 8, and eventually we have this long equation that spans here, but I have no idea what you've done. I don't know where you got the numbers. I don't know what you were doing. And now if I want to pick apart, well, actually you got the percentage wrong there, but everything else right, it's a lot more difficult for me as an examiner. Whereas this process allows you to always deal with everything you need, which is make sure you know what the carrying value is. Make sure you know what your depreciation rate is. Make sure you know how many months you're dealing with. Always have all of your information in front of you, okay? So I've kind of created this as a little template, and I've kind of given it in the PDF, I've kind of given it there, okay? So for every one of your asset, your depreciation calculations, you'll see you have little labels: old, sold, new, or remaining. Always calculate your carrying value at the beginning of the year. Always write down what your diminishing balance or what your depreciation is, and you'll see here that I have said if you straight line, then it's cost times your percentage. And if it is diminishing balance, then it is carrying amount times your percentage, and then calculate your months. So the more consistent that you learn to do these calculations, the more likely you are to get marks. So timeline, keeping track of stuff, labeling your calculations, working consistently, these are the things that are going to get you marks. Okay, so I know it sounds like we covered, I feel like that went really fast, and at the same time, crap load of stuff. Hope it makes sense. Most of the time, the problems that students have in exams is not because they don't know how to calculate depreciation, it's because they don't know how to work with all this information. So from here, I want you to take a couple of questions and I want you to practice your approach. Separate the sold, separate the old, separate the new, and make sure that you get marks. You can see that although it's only a few numbers on the case study, you can see that this, the stuff that we've done here is worth a good 10 marks in the question. And I mean, that's worth getting, right? So the process, as I said up front, process, very important. The way that you're going to manage your time is by getting used to this and practicing it. The info in the case study, know what it means and know how to deal with it and label it. Make sure that you deal with stuff consistently, and always separate and look for sold, old, new, and always draw a timeline. Remember, these are your workings, right? So if you abbreviate stuff on your workings, you're fine. If it's messy, you're fine. The examiner is not going to mark your timeline. That's for your own purposes. Extremely valuable to plot out, it moved here, changed there, da, 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 da. You're not going to gain marks as long as you make sure that you have given us a little heading that says, these are my working. Always label them differently, always make sure that I know what they are, be as specific as possible, spread it out, don't take it slow, that's a bad idea, but practice doing this on a regular basis. So this particular question I've covered, as part of one of the exam courses inside, inside the full course for our stuff, and that kind of, gives you more of an indication of the whole thing fits together. So I apologize for pulling out a little bit of it. But I hope that this has helped you, one, potentially understand the way that depreciation works a little bit more, the separation between straight line diminishing, and very importantly, how do we actually get marks in an exam. I will send you the PDF for this. You may have to zoom in on some areas, but other than that, that is our depreciation situation, and that is it. If you have a question, can you just type it in there, and I can see if I can answer it now. If you have it, so if you're done and you want to leave, you're welcome to leave. If you have a question, just type it in there. I've got the question, where do we get the PDF? I've got your emails, so I will email you the PDF after this. And obviously, you're also going to get the link once we've put it on YouTube. You're also going to get the link for that. So I will send you the PDF for this, as well as the PDF of the full question here, so that you can practice this on your own. So do any of you have any other questions relating to the stuff that we've discussed here? Either I can answer here, or I can tell you where to go and find the answer. Or any other comments? Thank you. It's a pleasure. If you got any comments, if you can email me after the session, if you can respond to the email with the PDF and give me an indication of whether or not this helps you, then that's great. I've got a question. We did get the link for Monday's webinar. I'm not quite sure. Oh, for the YouTube stuff. If you mean the YouTube stuff, yes, that's great. It does take a little bit of time for us to get the stuff on YouTube, as you can imagine. Thank you for the session. It was helpful. That's awesome. Great. Oh, you did not. Yeah, you won't get the link. You won't get the link for Monday's session if you were at Monday's session for a while, because we're still just editing the video and putting it up on YouTube. So as soon as it is up, you will get it, but it hasn't been done yet. So sorry, it's not something that you're not going to get. Alrighty, so as I say, you're welcome to leave. If you've got questions, I'm going to hang around a little bit in case you do have some questions. But otherwise, thank you for attending, and I will I will chat to you by email. Session was informative. Thanks. That's awesome. I'm very, very glad it was helpful. For those of you that remain, I sincerely hope that you are doing exam questions, because the stuff that you find in your textbooks and the stuff that you find in the study guides are generally quite different to the way that the exams and the actual questions work, and way too many students struggle to reconcile the two. So this is why I like to try and do stuff like this from the exam questions, so that you can actually see how it looks in the questions. Will there be more webinars? They probably will. We've kind of done this because of the fact that we're all sitting in the current global situation that we are. All of us have a lot of classes, so we kind of have to squeeze this into our classes and our students and all the stuff that we're doing. So we haven't planned all of them out, and we also wanted to see how they went and how students found them and if the internet held up. So as soon as we know and as soon as we plan, just keep an eye, and we'll advertise and we'll communicate with you what we're doing. But we're trying to spread it out. I don't know if I'll be doing any other first year FINAC ones. If the next webinar I'm planning or thinking of doing will be for auditing. Obviously, that's my specialty. So I can't really give you too much of an indication of exactly what else we will be doing. Thanks for the format to calculate depreciation. Informative, good structure, planning, save on time. Yeah, absolutely. Your most important issue in exams is always your time. So the more you can have a format that forces you to go, oh crap, yeah, oh crap, yeah, oh crap, yeah. let me make sure that I do this. These are where your marks come from. You wait for the YouTube link, absolutely. I've got a question. How do you think the Unisa will approach the May, June exams? If you're asking about whether or not, our potential lockdown situation is going to affect you, it is a good question. What Unisa have done for tests that have been written now. So we actually had a CTA, a postgrad test that was written, that would normally be written, you know, the same way that your exams are written, for example. And it was literally the week of the lockdown. Unisa had like a week and a half to prepare. It was quite scary. We actually thought that they were going to cancel it. So it was written, I think, on like the 24th of March, I think. Anyway, so what Unisa did is they did an online exam approach. So they gave you a link, and then on the morning of the exam at like 8 o'clock, they published the exam online. You downloaded the exam, did the exam, and then you had up to a certain time to scan or take photos of your exam attempt, your solution, and email it or submit it back to them online. So they have like an online exam submission thing, and you literally submit it almost like you would a written assignment, but you got to do it within that particular time frame. So some students are kind of going, oh, does that mean we won't be writing exams? Very unlikely. Most of your universities have moved to, you know, if we have to do tests, we're going to do them online. You have to download them, print them out, you know, do them, and then upload them after your normal 2 hours or 2 hours and 15 minutes, just to give you time to scan them in. So honestly, one of the things that I think about if this stuff does continue is whether or not you have a printer. Quite honestly, it was one of the issues that I kind of thought was a challenge, because, you know, how do you do this? How do you print this out, you know, if you don't have a printer? But yeah, it's very unlikely that your exams will be cancelled. They will be written, even if they're written online with you writing at home. I think that's what you're asking, and that would be the answer. Any more questions? The rest of you, I can see kind of some of you are still hanging around. I don't know if you're hanging around in the hopes that someone else is going to ask a question that you want the answer to. The answer is no. If you want an answer to a question, you need to ask the question. Yeah, you're right. We just got a comment on the fact that the CTA tests were not, you know, were not ideal. There's no question. As I say, they had like a week, you know, they had a week to organize the situation. So there's no question that, you know, and it was the first time they've ever done something like that. So there's no question that it was a mess. I don't know how they're going to approach that. I don't know exactly how they're going to fix that situation. But you know, we need to learn from what we can and make sure that we're as organized as possible, and do the best, you know, do the best that we possibly can do. Honestly, that's, you know, that's the only option. I know that it was poor, you know, trying to do this on the networks that we have in South Africa, or, you know, that you have in South Africa, is always tricky. So, you know, as challenging as it was, what we can take from that is, you know, make sure that we understand, we know, you know, we're fast, you know, we get fast at scanning our stuff, we know what we need to do, and hope that that's not something that, you know, that applies to them. And Unisa learns as well, you know, stuff that they struggle with, then they may now open emails and go, okay, fine, you know, you need to email it. Will people not find a way to cheat? Man, people always find a way to cheat. I think what people underestimate is, as a lecturer and as a marker, you'll be amazed at how, you know, and how you can find out, or how you see what people do. You know, I know what students are capable of doing. So it's actually, to some extent, fairly easy to spot when students do stuff wrong. If you have to upload, you know, if you have to download and upload your stuff within the exam time, it doesn't actually give you a lot of time to, you know, to pull out your textbooks and, you know, go and research the answer for stuff. If you have to, you know, submit your exam question or submit your exam after the time is done, it's not like you have the time to look at the question and then go run off to your textbooks and your tut letters and go, you know, how do I do this? What do I do with that? Then yeah, it's that is a problem. But you'll be amazed as a lecturer, like, you know, I'm fairly good at spotting, like, you know, what students are capable of doing. Power failures, no idea. As far as power failure is concerned, yeah, honestly can't tell you. You know, possibly the best option is to try and get a hold of Unisa. Maybe don't panic too much about it now because we still have a little bit of a way to go. But yeah, I can't tell you. I'm not involved with Unisa stuff, so I don't know. I don't know. You're asking stuff about why Unisa does stuff the way they do, or assignments instead of tests. I have no idea. That you're going to have to chat to Unisa about. The testing process is done as it is for a specific reason, and I'm certainly not going to give someone 2 days to submit something, because that does give them way too much time to get help for the stuff, to go and research it, to go and cheat on the stuff. The reason that we need a 15-minute time slot to upload it is to make sure that you don't have the time, to run around and get answers for it, etc., etc. So it is a tricky one, but it is the way it goes. Should you approach the exam differently? No. Make sure that that you've got a space in your house that you dedicate to your little exam zone. Set everything up exactly the same way that you would. Nothing on your desk, no distractions as far as possible, and do it exactly the same way. Make sure that you monitor your time. You've got a little stopwatch. Do everything as far as possible exactly the same way that you would in an exam, because that's the best way. That's what you're doing. So simulate the exam environment as far as possible, which is why I always say to students, when you study, you should be simulating the exam environment as you study. So you should be doing questions under exam conditions to learn and to get comfortable with the process as it is. Second year student wondering if I might know. No answer from Unisa. I'm not sure what you're wondering I might know. I can't see any other question from you, so I don't know. Oh, do we need to reapply for the new curriculum? No, I don't. I'm not entirely sure. You may want to send me an email and ask that question. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. Unisa is a little screwed at this particular point in time. You can imagine the queries that they're dealing with. So you may want to send me an email. My email address is yvonne@yvonnefenter.com. So send me an email and ask me. I'm not entirely sure what curriculum you're referring to. Alrighty, so we're now moving on to change from semester to year modules. Okay, if you are talking about that, then no, you don't need to reapply. So what they're doing is they're saying at the moment, it started with third year this year in 2020, for example. If you've done any second year modules, then they keep you on the old curriculum. Sorry, if you've done any third year modules or any modules, semester-based modules already, then you don't move over to the year-based stuff. If you're just starting that level and that year and you haven't done any semester modules for that year, then they will move you and they will register you for the full year annual module. So there's going to be quite a few years transition where you're going to have people doing different things. Some people are going to be doing year modules and some people are still going to be doing semester modules. Because if you've done any modules at that level, any semester modules at that level, they will keep you on the module basis for the rest of your degree. If you haven't done any semester modules at that level, they will move you over to the year based as soon as you register. So that's something that they will do depending on where you are in that process. Louisa, yeah, that is my email, yvonne@yvonnefenter.com. Okay, that is what you meant. All right. So many curriculum changes, so many things. Awesome. Yeah. No, you don't have to worry about it. They will shift that over to you. When you apply, you'll see that the stuff available to you will be either the existing modules if you've done any, or the new year-based modules if you haven't. All right, dude, I'm going to carry on with my work and my productivity this afternoon. I hope that you go and do some studying. Please go and practice the stuff as soon as possible. Send me an email. Tell me how it's going. Make sure you're consistent. Do your stuff. Do your questions. Don't let fear get you down. Don't worry about failing questions. I would like you to fail questions while you study rather than in the exam. So go and fail to your heart's content as much as possible. Have an awesome afternoon. Cheers.